トビデオ
It's stating the obvious to say that Japan has a sort of thing with robots, gigantic or otherwise. They're so interwoven into the fabric of their cultural perception, and it probably wouldn't have been that way without some good old historical precedents. Japan has had a long history in the art of puppetry going as far back as the 16th century, with the beginning of the Bunraku puppet theater. But around the 16th century, when limited trade from the Dutch brought clockwork technology to the island nation, that set off a powder keg of innovation. Inventors everywhere wished to combine the clockwork parts with puppets that imitated the form of men and women. These early examples of automata would soon get the name karakuri puppets. Karakuri, coming from the verb karakuru, meaning to pull, stretch, and move thread, were primarily used for entertainment purposes. They initially began as a means for the upper classes of the Sengoku period to show off parlor tricks to guests, gimmicky, expensive status symbols built to entertain local lords by firing tiny arrows or serving tea. But soon, inventors and engineers began creating larger and more elaborate karakuri puppets, making them life-sized or even larger. These puppets were also built to entertain, either in theaters or on top of festival floats for parades. This is the type of karakuri craftsmanship that still continues on to this day. But once the 20th century came around and curious creators began plunging into the Sengoku period for inspiration, there emerged the idea of the karakuri puppet as a weapon. It's an uncommon trope, but not a non-existent one. Using the power of puppetry as your combat specialty has found its way in multiple Japanese anime, manga, and video games. Especially video games when you consider that there's an entire fighting game character archetype based around this type of combat. But it really hasn't been the focus of a story. It usually is a gimmick reserved for side characters or the quirky mini-boss squad to show off weird powers. You can't really make an entire anime centered around such a niche power set. Or can you? Yasuburo Monogiri is a vagabond ninja, traveling across Japan and doing typical ninja jobs. But one such job presents him with a startling discovery. He and his partner are pursued relentlessly by an army of ninja who cannot seem to die. They are silent, fearsome warriors who shrug off any fatal blow thrown at them, while ensuring the death of those surrounding them. After his partner meets a bloody end and he barely escapes with his life in his hands, Yasuburo regroups at an abandoned house. This causes him to cross paths with a clumsy young girl carrying an enormous box on her back. Her name is Rangiku Ayawatari, the sole survivor of the Ayawatari clan. She seeks revenge on the man who killed her family, the tyrannical local lord of this region, Sadayoshi Karimata. She was hoping to find someone to help her out here, and I guess Yasuburo will do. But that's all avoiding the real question. What the heck is in that ginormous box of hers? The answer is what remains of her father's karakuri puppet collection. And do you know what she can do with them? Naturally, there is a connection between Rangiku's puppetry skills, Yasuburu's deathless pursuers, and the tyrannical feudal lord of this land. Both the puppeteer and the ninja find themselves teaming up to find out what that connection is. And when they do find the connection, let's just say they have peeled back a horrible secret. I'm sure not many of you have heard the 2000 Jiraiya OVA Puppet Princess. In fact, I have never heard of it up until a few months ago when I was brainstorming episode ideas and came across such a title. It was a nice quick OVA and it was easy to grab a hold of, so I figured I had a nice breezy episode ahead of me. But oh lordy, did fate have other plans for me there? This is a very strange OVA. The kind of OVA that would have your jaw agape with how much shenanigans these writers and animators get up to. Many what the hells were slowly said out of my mouth. And it also happens to be pretty good. But enough delay. I'm sure many of you are wondering why an anime with a title like Puppet Princess could be so disturbing. So let's tighten those strings and begin the show.
Pull the string! Pull the string!
Puppet Princess originates from the brain of one Kazuhiro Fujita. 90% of you who are watching this may not have heard of him, but the 10% who have are pumping their fists right now. Fujita is one of those manga authors who is well known in Japan and practically unknown in the West, but those who do know him swear by him. His bread and butter is the battle shonen genre, but the stories he tells resembles more weird fairy tales that are steeped in Japanese and Chinese mythology. And even with a sketchy art style, he can capture so much fierce emotion on the page. Not only that, but he's also unafraid of temporarily turning his works into wacky comedies and gritty violent horrors, and somehow still managing to work. Fujita has also been a mentor to other battle shonen authors who like dabbling in the strange and the quirky, like Flame of Recca's Nobuyuki Anzai and Zatch Bell's Makoto Raikou. Truly, an unsung master of the shonen genre who deserves more recognition outside his home country. I'll get around to doing a more detailed bio on Fujita once I get around to doing the OVA adaptation of his breakout hit, Ushio and Tora. For now, let's focus on Puppet Princess. Puppet Princess is an OVA adaptation of a short story written by Fujita, the first he did for an anthology of short stories called Night Songs, the first volume in the self-descripted anthology collection Kazuhiro Fujita's Short Stories. And not much else to say about it. Looking at the manga, the OVA is a faithful, straightforward adaptation of it, a short, tight narrative about puppet fighting and the quest for revenge. But this leads us to the real question of this section. Why did TMS Entertainment choose this Fujita story out of all the others to adapt into an OVA, especially at this period of time when the format is on its last legs? We don't know for sure what spearheads these business decisions on which manga get OVA adaptations. If anything, these couple of years have taught me that a lot of business decisions are based more on vibes if anything. But I do have one theory as to why Puppet Princess got a whole standalone OVA adaptation. Puppet Princess, the short manga, was written sometime around 1995, and then 2 years later, Fujita would release his anticipated follow-up to Ushio and Tora called Karakuri Circus. That story is all about puppet combat and revenge on a much grander scale. I don't want to assume much, but I have the feeling that Puppet Princess was Fujita's trial run for Karakuri Castle, and I'm pretty sure TMS thought so too. By 2000, 3 years into his 9-year run, Karakuri Circus was a super popular weekly shonen series that ran in Weekly Shonen Sunday, and that same year saw another Weekly Shonen Sunday title get a popular anime adaptation courtesy of Sunrise. So maybe TMS was thinking they'd do the same thing with Karakuri Circus. But TMS didn't want to throw all their chips in willy-nilly. They had to be cautious since money was tight for them at the time. The failure of their acclaimed Canadian co-production Cyber 6, combined with most overseas animation being outsourced to cheaper studios in China and Korea, meant they weren't as liquid as they once were in the 80s and 90s. So what better way to gauge interest than to put out an OVA for the story that was essentially the pilot for Karakuri Circus? But that's just my theory. I'm just going by where the anime and manga industry was at the time and how it could have given birth to a story like Puppet Princess. Only a fool would take what I've said in the previous paragraphs as hard historical evidence. Back to what we do know, which is who worked on this anime. Chief director and co-animation director for Puppet Princess was Hirotoshi Takaya. He's primarily known for his work on stuff like Detective Conan and the Gundam series, but more as an animator than a director. If you've ever seen an animation cut that looked like it was done by Masami Obari but not as excessive, then it was probably done by Takaya. After all, he did work with Obari as animation director for his Fatal Fury movies. Those are skills that get translated to Puppet Princess. If this had an intermediate budget like most anime productions at the time, you wouldn't know it because Takaya and his team are giving 110% in executing what is, quite frankly, super complicated battle scenes. These are not human fighters doing most of the fighting, but mechanical puppets. So they have to bend and move in a very uncanny fashion in order to separate themselves from the flesh and blood humans in these fights. And while this does give the animators more freedom of movement, they also have to keep Rangiku's presence in mind. Those fighters are only moving because she's nearby controlling them with both her hands and her feet, which adds another layer of complexity to the battles. The combat animation comes together beautifully in the climax, where we finally get to see the evil Lord Karimata and discover that he has grafted Lord Ayawatari's most advanced puppet to himself in a monstrosity of flesh and clockwork. It's a Byzantine character design, and yet the animators not only pull it off, but they get him to move incredibly well in his sword fight against Yasubura. It's nice to see cell animation still going strong during the period of the digital switchover, although that does not stop some CGI shots from creeping in. We can all agree that the animation of Puppet Princess is stellar. What's more divisive is the overall direction Takaya opts to take. Fujita is one of the more difficult manga authors to adapt since he's known for swinging wildly between genres, but he pulls it off because it never comes off as tonally dissonant. In the hands of someone who isn't him, there's a chance that they would not be able to thread that needle. I know Takaya is doing his best translating Fujita's story, but it is strange to see an anime where characters can go from making your typical cartoony shonen humor faces to grimacing like they were in a really dark Gekiga comic showing more teeth than a Mr. Beast thumbnail.
Come on, skull, pop out of my skin!
However, as off-putting as it may seem, I think Takaya makes a smart choice in leaning into the horror elements when they seem appropriate. After Rangiko and Yasuburo get acquainted with each other, we learn about Rangiko's backstory and why she carries those puppets around. Lord Ayawatari was a Karakuri puppet enthusiast and devoted his entire life to playing and tinkering with them, even at the expense of his kingdom and family. It got to the point where he started becoming obsessed with making life-size models of those puppets, and he had to use a specific type of string to make them work properly. That string was made from the flesh of a child, and not just any child, but his own daughter.
私は当時5つ。私は幼児にして父親に背中の生皮を剥がされました。
それじゃあ、からくりのバネってな。
はい。
And after Lord Karimata destroyed the Ayawatari clan and stole all those puppets, he is keeping up that dark ritual. Those deathless warriors are Karakuri puppets that utilize string made from the skin of children, and the Lord needs a steady supply of that skin in order to keep building his army of immortals. All of that above is played with the right amount of horror. It was played for similar horror in the manga, but Takaya really goes all out in portraying these events as the sick and twisted rituals they are, intensifying the reds, making the scenes look appropriately grimy, and having everyone involved look less human and more like the twisted monsters they are. By the by, I would count this as an OVA that sells itself on its bloody violence, a subgenre of the format that was also going out with a bang in the early aughts. Voice acting in this OVA also really helps sell the premise. Akiko Yajima, yes, Shin-chan, has excellent range as Rangiku, able to play her both as a naive, sheltered princess only getting by on her puppet skills, and as a broken woman who is desperately hoping revenge will get her the salvation she craves.
私は綾渡りの家のためにでも父の仇を討つためにでも戦うのではありません。私は私の皮を使って動くあの人形が嫌なのです。
And it's nice seeing Norio Wakamoto step outside the evil overlord comfort zone and play a put-on every ninja as Yasuburo. A real badass when he locks in, but spends a lot of time frustrated and vocally wondering why a sweet girl like Rangiku would ever want anything from a scumbag drifter like him.
俺ともあろうもんが真面目に考えちまった。金だけもらって適当に付き合ってヤバくなりゃ逃げりゃいいんじゃい。バカな箱入り姫じゃ。
Structurally, Puppet Princess is the perfect type of story to adapt into an OVA, not only because it has a unique premise and a plot that offers plenty of opportunities for combat, but it's so tightly written with barely any fat left once you turn the last page. This carries on into the OVA. Scenes are expanded through Takaya's direction, but it keeps the entire structure of Fujita's short story intact, resulting in an OVA that feels like a complete product. It's not overstuffed, nor do the events feel stretched out. Takaya really makes Fujita's economical storytelling choices shine. By the halfway point, we know everything there is to know about our two characters and their mission, and even with the limited screen time, Lord Karimata still manages to be an intimidating villain by his off-screen presence alone. He's turning Lord Ayawatari's twisted hobby into a war economy. and it rarely deviates from the source material, which is both a good and bad thing. It's good because it keeps a lot of what makes the story good in the first place, but bad in that it retains some of the story's flaws. While Takaya is great at adaptation and even expanding the horror Fujita puts on the page, how he handles Fujita's comedy is a whole nother story. Most of the comedy in this anime, if you could call it that, centers around the general naivete of Rangiku and Yasuburo's incredulity at said naivete. And this is all winding up to a moment at the midway point where Yasuburo, for some reason, decides he wants to sexually assault Rangiku while she is bathing in a nearby stream. I have no idea why he's doing this because the moment comes out of nowhere. At first I thought it was an act to scare Rangiku off from storming the castle tomorrow, since that was what he was ruminating on before this scene starts, but that doesn't make any sense from a storytelling standpoint since he's already seen what Rangiku can do with those puppets and has already agreed to take her to the castle in exchange for money. Really, the only reason this happens is A, to get Rangiku to reveal the twisted scar in her back and talk about the demented stuff her dad got into with the puppets, and 2, to deliver this punchline.
続きは全部終わってからじゃ。
お待ちしております。
バカ野郎、お前俺が何しに来たか分かってねえな。
すみません。
This is something we can pin entirely on Fujita. Not only is this a really sloppy way of getting a character to launch into important plot details, but the sexual assault joke that this anime's comedy hinges on is simultaneously offensive and super corny. Monkey Punch can't even really get away with this kind of humor, and Fujita is no Monkey Punch. And I say the anime hinges on this joke because its grand return is what the story chooses to close out on.
ほら、加藤様のしたいことをランギクになさるという。
But once we get past that, the story really kicks into high gear. Amidst all the fights, we get more development from Rangiku. It turns out that the reason why she is so dead set on being on the front lines of this mission is not just so she can take the matters of revenge into her own hands, but also so that she can destroy her father's puppets in the heat of battle. She's both avenging her father and getting revenge on him in kind for the crime of valuing those puppets at the expense of his loved ones.
人形を燃やすなですよ。父は母のことも私のことも最後まで案じてはくれませんでした。私は戦いを理由に人形にこそ復讐をしていたのです。
But even then, Rangiku has conflicted feelings since it was her father who taught her how to fight with those puppets, and those were the moments where she felt a loving connection with him. And Takaya conveys this conflict through Rangiku's facial expressions every time a puppet gets destroyed, her face being a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. The best bit of writing is the final conflict, which I'm gonna spoil, so skip to here if you wish to not hear anymore. Yasuburo and Lord Karimata are fighting like demons, and it takes them to the top of the palace. It appears that Yasuburo is fighting alone at this time, since in the last scene, it appears that Rangiku was rendered out of commission thanks to an enemy bomb. But then, Rangiku appears out of nowhere with all 4 puppets fixed up and ready for action, manipulating all of them at the same time. Even with initial frustration, Karimata makes short work of 3 of the marionettes. However, Yasuburo reveals his true identity as Gonzo Kato, a famed ninja known for creating illusions and the person Rangiku was initially seeking out in the beginning, and that Rangiku and those puppets were exactly that, illusions. One puppet remains though, and Lord Karimata thinks it's just another one of Yasuburo's tricks, right up until that trick stabs him in the stomach with a bladed fan, brutally killing him. That puppet was actually Rangiku in disguise. It is such a well-executed climactic twist. Or at least it would be if every single bit of marketing and articles about this OVA didn't spoil it. Sheesh. Puppet Princess is definitely a weird beast. It can be off-putting with some of its choices in imagery, storytelling, and joke-telling, but the structure here shows a solid Jidaigeki with a one-of-a-kind premise executed well, and that's really all you need out of an anime like this. It's a pity this anime has fallen into unknown status at this time. Seeing that Takaya and his team would later be put on an adaptation of a different Weekly Shonen Sunday title, and Karakuri Circus wouldn't get a proper anime adaptation until 2019. And while Media Blasters has kept the license going in the States, Puppet Princess barely gets any recognition, even as a cheesy ultra-violent anime OVA. A fate I don't think it deserves. Takaya and the rest of Team S did Fujita's story justice in so many ways, and even build on it. Nothing really much to add except, good job. This is an ideal 3.5 star OVA. Not perfect, but worthy of a late night anime watch. Simple, concise, and doesn't feel the need to string you along. Ha ha. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video or want to support this channel, please donate to my Patreon. Each dollar can give you early access to my videos as they come out, as well as keep the channel running a bit more smoothly. You can also subscribe to the channel, ring that bell for notifications, or just like this video. Either way, you'll be helping me out. That's all for now. See you for the next round of tapes.
It's dark, so...